Okay, here we go.
So there's
We have takeoff.
Yeah. There's always this, once I press record, right? There's always this awkward moment where
where everybody becomes serious.
I mean, you
focused.
All even laughter self, because we did talk already before we press record. So the viewers, whoever they watch this, they'll just see this.
Yes.
So I do these conversations with people I know, people I've worked with, friends, just people that I feel like have somehow experienced life from an interesting perspective. Yeah, this particular living session, because it's going through layers, you know. That's what this is. Now, there are other types of conversation within the TAC platform that doesn't necessarily require the person to be to have experienced life in a particular way, you know, just document whatever. But this one is really living session, going into our lives, the lives that we've lived, through moments, you know, experiences, transition. But me, like, you know, I'm very interested in movement. So I'm going to welcome you. At least you're someone that I know, respect, I could call friend and family. So welcome. Let's know your name, right?
Okay.
What you do. Let's know your name, what you do, where you're coming from, and where you're from.
Okay. So my name is Kobina Ankomah-Graham, and I guess I'll begin with where I'm from. So I'm from Ghana. My parents were both born and raised here, but they had me in London. And so the first time I came to Ghana was when I was maybe 6 or 7. And then I was here for maybe a 7-year stretch before returning to London, and now I've been back in Ghana for about close to 15 years, just living here, and now I'm married here with a son. I am a lecturer currently at Webster University in East Legon here in Accra. I am also a writer. I have been writing for maybe since I moved here. So it started out as a blog. I do short stories. I do freelance writing as well. I'm currently working on a book that I might talk about at some point in time. And I am also a DJ. So I've been DJing for almost 20 years. Genre-wise, I try not to stick to any particular genre, but what I would say is if there's popular culture, there's also maybe unpopular culture, and my focus tends to be a lot more on what is maybe less known, what is given less of an outlet. I try and amplify those kinds of voices in the music that I play. So I think if I would describe myself as any one thing, it's a teacher, and that the teaching runs through my lecturing, it runs through my music, it runs through my writing. That's me.
Yeah. So, okay, let's go to London, right?
Okay.
Let's start from London, because the journey starts from London for you, but definitely because I believe like the body as a memory collector. So your journey did not start in London, because if you look at the biology, they say every egg in the woman is already, you can trace it back to generation to generation, right? So if you look at it from your grandmother now, maternal grandmother, you know, you can situate yourself there, because egg were produced, your mother, was already already had you. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You understand? So
No. I mean, it reminds me of genetic memory, even like the fact that somewhere inside of you is the residue of every single one of your ancestors.
yes,
And so
yes,
if your genes have memory,
yes,
like there's a theory that those people who feel that they encounter past lives,
yeah.
that it's not past lives in the sense of their own life,
Actually,
but
memories.
perhaps their ancestors'
Yeah,
lives.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
I feel you.
yeah, but then you can even look at that as also past life, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
transfer of memory, and it is actually memory we look at as past life. You understand? Not
Yes.
meditation. It's actually the memory
Yeah.
stuff, right? So
Yeah.
and that's why
Yeah.
when
For real.
the people who are looking into even mutation like cloning,
Mm-hmm.
it's past life, transferring one life into another body, and
Mm.
it's
Mm.
like. But let's go back to London. What's your earliest memory
Okay.
from 0 to 7?
My earliest memory is I have two earliest memories. One of them is my father used to line some of his vinyl, on our living room wall in London. This was we were in a flat in Tufnell Park, before it got gentrified, and he had these records on the wall. And the one that I remember is Bob Marley. I think it was the Uprising album. I'm not sure, but it basically had Bob Marley rising out of a volcano, and his dreadlocks were the lava. And so this is one of my earliest memories. I just remember that I always used to be terrified of that album cover. It used to scare the crap out of me. So there's that. Another of my earliest memories is sitting on my father's lap watching the original series of Star Trek on our very small color TV. This was before the age of widescreen TVs and all of that good stuff. You know those TVs that you had to tune them? There was no remote control. You had to, yeah, one of those. It
And
was a Hitachi.
sometimes you
Yeah.
have to slap
Yes. Ha! Yeah. So I remember watching the original series of Star Trek on my dad's lap.
Yeah.
These memories must have been from maybe when I was 3. I also remember a party. They threw me a 3 years party. So these are my earliest memories.
Okay. So we're looking at that, and that is taking us to your relationship with your father. So we're just going to be like, we're going to in and out. Looking at that
Yeah.
picture, right? Sitting on your father's
Mm.
lap and transitioning that relationship from that father and son relationship between 0 and 7 in London,
Mm.
transport that relationship
Mm-hmm.
to Ghana. How did Ghana change your relationship with your father?
I think in a big way. In a big way. By the time I moved back to Ghana, I had been away from Ghana for 8 years. Um, Before that, the best friend that I had when I was in secondary school, here, he died in a car accident when I was, I think, in university. He was supposed to have moved to the US to study. He went to a party in Tema, and on his way back, there was a very bad accident. And 5 people in the car, unfortunately, he passed away. He was the only one. And so I came to Ghana for his funeral. I had a big argument with my father during the funeral because I chose to stay with the mother of my friend's mother. I chose with my younger brother. We chose to stay there, and my father was concerned about what it would look like for him because we'd had a troubled relationship in the past, him and I. At some point in time, when I was still in school, he actually disowned me. And then, so I had gone to stay with my best friend and his mother for a year. So I think it concerned him that I was back for this funeral, but I was staying with her. And it's a long story, but we argued about it. And so before I left, my stepmother actually intervened and she helped us to kind of resolve our differences. But I left, and when I left, my friend had been my tie to Ghana. Whenever I was away and I'd come back, he would just reconnect me to everybody, to what was happening, to what music was reigning, like everything. And so when he left, when he passed, that connection was gone. And so for 8 years, I was away from Ghana. In the UK, I finished my degrees. I was working, but it was actually my dad who persuaded me to give Ghana a try, to come back. I think when I finished university, like 9/11 had pretty much just happened. The job market had shrunk. It's a crazy time. And he was the one who kept on saying, unless you come home, nothing will happen for you. There is nothing in that London for you. And so he just gently persuaded me. And eventually I found this internship opportunity at the University of Ghana, Institute of Statistical, Social and Economic Research. It was for about 3 months, and I took it. And I came and I stayed with him. He made sure that I was looked after, and I think the job got extended for a month. And then after that, I decided I'm going to go back to London, pack all of my things, and move back to Ghana. And one of the main reasons I decided to move was because I had younger siblings who were here. My father and my mom, they divorced before he left London. He left in like 1986. And we moved here in 87 originally, but we went to stay with my mother's mother in Cape Coast. So the 7 years that I was here was in Cape Coast, not Accra. Yeah, so like my grandmother, she sold cloth in Kotokraba market. So we were kind of, I guess, middle class, if you will. We lived on A4 estates. We grew our food in the backyard. By the time I got to Mfantsipim, I was this Dada B kid who somehow was getting A's in agricultural science because I already knew how to transplant plants. Like, I was very confusing to a lot of the rich kids. Didn't know what to do with me because I wasn't one of them. But then at the same time, I traveled more than them.
Yeah.
So they, like, no one knew what to do with me. Yeah. But anyway, so basically, when I moved back, I stayed with my dad, but then he had other kids. He had remarried and he had other kids, several. And so when I came back after the 8 years, I reconnected with my siblings as like, they were grown now, they had personalities and ideas, and I felt like they needed their older brother. I love my father, but there are certain things that he's not good at. Yeah, I think he's a good man, but he's not a good father, and he's in as much as he wasn't a good husband either. And so because of these things, I felt it was important for my younger siblings for me to come home. I'm the firstborn, and so I feel that sense of responsibility. And so I moved. So my relationship with my father, he helped to bring me here. He sheltered me. It wasn't smooth. We argued. When I moved back, I was working for him. It was a company that was installing security and surveillance equipment, and it was failing. And he put me in charge while he focused on the construction business. He had retired from the Bank of Ghana at this point, and he said, you turn this company around. And I came in with all my highfalutin Western ideas of how businesses should be run.
In
And Ghana
Accra.
taught me many lessons. Yes, in Accra. Oh. Like my cousin who was working with me was like, look, in order for us to get paid, we need to pay this person a bribe. I said, no, we're not paying bribes. Like, no, those days are over. Those days are over. Right. I had a lot of lessons to learn.
Big one.
So I learned a lot of lessons. Big
Yeah.
ones. I was broke for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, my relationship with my father is not smooth. It's not smooth.
So
Yeah.
so let's look at the responsibility that comes with being the firstborn. The responsibility that comes with witnessing a failed father, like in terms of the responsibility that comes with being a parent, witnessing that, but then the responsibility of if I think he is failing and he failed me, I want to be a better brother to my younger sibling because they need something other than what they have in their father. Like, not everybody can come to that conclusion. You know?
Okay. Yeah.
The idea of sacrifice, you know?
Okay.
So,
Okay.
like, who would you say, first of all, we'll go into the father now. Who would you say gives that sense of responsibility and selflessness?
I think it was the combination of a few things. I think on the one hand, I was made aware of the fact that my mother was standing in for herself and my father. She had to kind of be two in one after he left. And so I was reminded of that. She tried as much as she could to make sure that we did not inherit her problems with my father. She would always say, you must respect him, he's your father. And she tried her best to make sure that that was the line. But then she said that in order to have a relationship with him, you need to not rely on him. And so she worked very hard to make sure that that was possible. So especially she got a job at the World Health Organization at some point, and that there were decisions that could be made without relying on him or his purse strings or anything. So, but there was a lot of struggle before that. So I learned about that, and I think my mom also just taught me that I needed to be responsible. Not just my mom, but like especially moving to Cape Coast, it was something that was thrust on me. I'm the older of two boys, and I need to be the responsible one. I need to be looking after my younger brother. So I had that upbringing from my mother in London before I came at the age of 7, 8. Then when I came, it was reinforced within kind of traditional Fanti, like home, within a traditional Fanti home. And then I guess the secondary school system here also reinforced it in the sense that you learn responsibility. I went to boarding school and I was in the last batch of people who did the O level. So it meant I did 5 solid years at Mfanspem, and you're taught that as well. But the last components that I would say is that in as much as my mother tried to make sure that I had father figures, I think in the end, and this is something that I think helps to define who I am today, I had to design my own sense of manhood and masculinity. And so there were different points in time where I learned different lessons. And these are the lessons that I would imagine people learn by looking at their father. But the way that I was raised was to look at my father as someone who he's not necessarily a bad person, but you have to compartmentalize him. So you focus on the part of him which is charming and nice, and you can have jokes with him. But then there are all these other sides, and you have to kind of put them in a box and push them to one side. And so I've never grown up wanting to be my dad, or at least not after the age of 7. Before that, I used to idolize my father because I look like my father more than I do my mother. And as a child, that used to make me, when people tell me, oh my God, you look so much like your father, it would fill me with a pride, a sense of pride. Yeah, but I think one of the defining things about me is I've had to define my own sense of masculinity and manhood. And so my father and I, there are several things where we talk about these things and we don't agree because we have very different ways of looking at what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine. And these are things that I either taught myself, or I decided that this person will be my father figure in this area, this person in this area, this person in that area. So it was like a composite kind of manhood. Yeah.
Okay, give me 1 second. I want to get something. 1 second.
Okay.
So
yes.
I'm fasting.
Okay.
Tell you the truth. So I'm fasting, and I'm only taking. For now, I'm taking just watermelon. I started today. So, Charlie.
I feel you.
So, but still on the responsibility, I
yes.
because for me, at the same age, you know, around 7, 8, 9, 10, I think it started for me around that time. I was just like, no, I don't want to be these people I see around me. My father, my mother, uncles, aunties. And my mother is an exceptional person. When I talk about my mother or my parents, or see, I can talk about these people and tell you how amazing they were, you know. But they're just pockets of moments where I just say, no, I don't want to see things from this perspective. What else is there, right? But still coming down to responsibility. So your mother has 2 kids. She assumes the responsibility to take care of those 2 kids, right? I'm going to play 2 roles. I'm going to bring in as much strong men that I can bring around, strong characters I can bring around. But still, it's our responsibility. These 2 boys are kids. You come to, I'm looking at the point where that transition that happened where you decided to come and be based here, right? Yes, you can compartmentalize your father and separate the good, the bad, and the everything. But then you're looking at your siblings.
Yeah.
They are not, you are not their father. You are not a parent to them, right?
No.
So there is a difference in that selflessness that you take on compared to that of a parent who decides to be 100% with. You understand? So I just want to also know, like, in the moment where obviously it's not like you're going to say, I'm going to move back because of you, because then that would be like ego tripping. But the moment where you realize how important your presence in Ghana would also be beneficial to your siblings, like, how did you feel? Was there a sense of pain and sadness that my father is failing these people again, you know? Was there a sense of excitement in the type of relationship you can develop with these young siblings? Like, how did you feel? And then also, now that you're now based in Ghana, how is that? How's that transition happened?
Okay. So I think during the time that I came to Ghana for the internship, I would go and visit my younger sister who was in boarding school at the time here. So whenever I'd go and see her, maybe every 2-3 weeks or something like that. But there was one time where her headmistress was around, and when I was done with my sister, she called me over, went to her office, and she basically sat me down and she told me that she asked me whether I was thinking about moving to Ghana, and I said yes, I am. And she said I should really think about it long and hard because my sister is better when I'm in Ghana.
Oh, wow.
That's how she put it to me. Yeah,
Oh,
she told me that my presence has a positive influence on my sister, and so I should really consider moving back. And so that was something that definitely resonated very heavily with me. I think at the time, part of the problem was also that my dad had remarried. So this was his third wife. And his third wife and my sister didn't get on. But the nature of power in the household is such that my sister was not getting much of her way. And so, so when I moved back, some of the things that I would do to balance to level the playing field were, while on the one hand, everyone had told me very, very bad things about my father's third wife, but I believe in making up my own mind. And so me and her, I tried as much as I can to get on with her. And for a while we were cool. But then at the same time, one thing that I would consistently do is I made my room, my bedroom, a safe haven. Yeah. So when my sister was there, nobody could call her or worry her. It means that she's with me, leave her alone. And so I had a very kind of protective role over my sister, also because I guess she was the last of my siblings to stay with my father.
Yeah.
Because the others were the children of his second wife, who I call my stepmother.
Okay.
Who is a fantastic woman who I still get along with. In fact, where I live, I partly chose to live here because it's around the corner from her. She's an amazing woman. So she had 3 kids, 2 by my father. And I got on with them as well, but they had moved out of the house by the time I moved to Ghana. And so she was the last one because she was my father's daughter. And it's almost like I was there for her in a sense. And I felt that let me try and be, if not a father figure, then just a good male role model in her life. And so there are ways in which my father and I are just very different, because I don't think it's necessarily his fault, but he also just comes from a very different time where things were done very different. So things like talk about mental health, opening up about emotions, telling people that you love them, affirming them. These are not things that are my father's strongest suit. And so I would play that role for my sister. And it seems like she needed those things. And so I would try as much as I could to keep her on the straight and narrow. But then there are other things as well, because obviously I was working for my dad for a time. He gave me the authority to sign checks for the company when he wasn't around. And one of the things that I took responsibility for was making sure that my younger siblings, especially the ones who had moved out of the house, that my father lived up to his responsibility to pay their fees. And because whenever that would happen, he would have excuses or whatever, and I would basically just sign the check, you see. And we used to fight about it. When my sister is younger than the one I'm talking about, she got into a really good school. She's the one out of all of us kids who, she's always been hardworking, always been smart, etc. You can never say anything like, oh, she didn't well, so I'm not going to pay her fees. She did everything correctly. She's the most sensible out of all of us. And then she gets into pretty much the top school in the country. And my dad says he starts making excuses like he's not going to pay. Not only did I sign the check, I sent him a letter, and it was not a nice letter. I sent him a letter basically explaining to him that what he did with us after he left, I'm not going to let him repeat it with these younger ones. So
Wow.
he should disabuse himself of that notion. And I've summarized it very succinctly. It was a 4-page letter, and there were a lot of swear words. And we had a very big falling out after that. But the fees got paid, at least at one time.
Yeah.
So these are the kinds of responsibilities that I felt towards my siblings. And then one last thing I'll say on that is also, you have to understand, we are all children of different mothers.
Yes. Yes.
I have taken it upon myself to be the glue between my siblings. My criteria is very simple. Are you my father's child? Yes, then you are one of us. And so that, like, by the time I started teaching at Ashesi, where I taught for 8 years,
Yeah.
my younger sister enrolled at the same time as me. So I was there as a lecturer. She had just joined as a student.
Yeah.
And it was, I think at graduation, when she was graduating, that some people got to know that she wasn't my full sister. She was my half sister, because you would never guess from the way that we are with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also beautiful that you do not use step, half. You don't use all of those references because at the end of the day, your sibling is a sibling, and I feel
Yes.
like all these words are created to keep dividing and separating and creating compartments in our head, you know.
Yeah.
So really, I want to congratulate you on that because I feel like as you were doing that, you were training yourself to become the father that you are today. Being
Trying
conscious,
to be.
yeah, being conscious of parenting. I feel that's one of the
Yes.
problems that our parents have. I don't know how your dad is like in his 80s or 70s.
So my dad is in his 70s, but even though he lived a very healthy lifestyle, like my dad has never eaten chicken or meat, like
Yeah.
since he was a child. He only eats fish, has done for years, doesn't eat after 7, just very healthy habits. But then those got derailed somewhere in his 60s. And a few years ago, he had, I think, 2 strokes back to back, and they've left him with dementia. So now it's very hard to have a conversation with him.
Yeah.
He only remembers up to maybe 10 minutes,
Yeah.
or maybe his long-term memory. So he'll remember who you are,
Yeah.
maybe, but if you ask him if he's eaten today, he can't necessarily give you
Yeah.
a good answer. Yeah. So but
My
yeah.
father is in his 70s, and I'm going to be releasing a series of conversations with him. And
Okay.
one of the things he called the children born in the 40s, he says they are called the war children, right?
Okay.
And that directly has an effect in how they were raised because the Second World War, you know, affected everything, affected parenting because the economy was down globally, you know,
Yeah.
it was a struggle. So they were trained, they were raised, I would say trained, they were trained with a particular mindset, you know, follow
Yes. Yeah.
rules, kill and divide. If I say go, you go, you know, those
Yes.
and education is the only way. You know? So,
Yep.
it's very interesting while I'm speaking to people and getting information from of their parents around this time, no matter where they are placed, it's connected, you know?
Yes.
It's really
Yeah.
connected. So yeah. Okay. I have so many things in terms of okay, so let's look at this. Let's look at this. What is your foundational belief when it comes to just life? What
Empathy.
yeah. Can you hear me?
It's empathy. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. It's empathy.
Empathy.
I think for me it's empathy. I was born, well, not born, but I was raised Christian. My mother wasn't kind of, I think when she was herself in Ghana, she had been a lot more classically Christian. By the time she moves to London, I think she doesn't pin herself down to any one Christian tradition. And so I remember growing up and going, she'd take me to the Methodist church, or she'd take me to the Catholic church, or to Jehovah's Witnesses, or to wherever was around, really. So I had a sample of all these different places. And then I came to Ghana and I was baptized and confirmed Methodist. There was a point in time in primary school where my favorite aunt was a Mormon, and so I thought I would be Mormon. And I'm even preaching in the primary school playground. I was that kid. A brief time. Then I think by the time I finished Omonhinmin and I moved back to London,
Yeah.
I think it's a bit of a long story, but my faith in traditional Christian religion was very shaken, and it didn't really survive. And so I went through 12, maybe 17 years of just not being Christian and just exploring and just reading as much as I could about religions, etc., etc. And I think in the end, I started to focus on the fact that all of the religions seem to have in common this golden rule, as they call it, and how the golden rule is essentially one of empathy. And so I started to think of empathy and the kind of love that accompanies empathy as being the defining thing. It's like the most godly quality that we can have as human beings. It brings us closer to God. That's the language of God, is love. And so the foundations of my belief system are love. I believe in love. They say God is love. Cool. Well, for me, it's love, and love as expressed through empathy. That is my core belief. It's what I try to let through everything that I do. It's what I try and hold people accountable for. Yeah.
So, would you say that you have had to adjust? You have had to go through certain adjustment when it comes to your empathy level. Now relocating to Ghana, realizing different systems that London and Accra, the different systems, compatibility, interaction with people, familiarity, integration, just the economic part, social part. Like did moving to Ghana test your empathy level, and also they did reduce it, they did increase it. Do you have moments where you had like a wow moment, like, oh, I think this is shaking, I have to refocus? Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that Ghana tested my empathy levels. I would say that I discovered myself when I moved here. So it's in the past 15 years. I would even argue that it's maybe in the past 5 that I've really gotten to know and understand myself and accept myself, which is key. Before that, I think I was still coming into myself and figuring myself out. But now I think I have a pretty solid grasp of what I can have a solid grasp on. And I am secure to know that the rest will take care of itself. And so I don't have to worry so much. So that's wisdom I've acquired. But I think I would say that Ghana didn't test my empathy as much as I found that empathy was my thing here.
Okay.
And I think I've just become also a lot more comfortable in my own beliefs and belief system. I think when I first moved here, I felt a lot of pressure to some extent to even pretend to be Christian at
Yeah.
various points in time. I did eventually go back to Christianity, but I think where I am now as we speak is I'm a very profoundly non-traditional Christian. So I don't think I'm Christian in any way that any Ghanaian Christian is going to look at me and be like, oh yeah, that person's really Christian. Because it's like, I've just come to understand a lot about the way in which so I'm talking about religion and using it kind of interchangeably with empathy, because to me these things kind of interrun.
Yes.
And I think for me, ultimately, my core is one of love. And so that's my first filter. So anything that I encounter, especially within like religious systems that I deem to be unloving and it doesn't resonate with my soul,
Yeah.
I cut it off, or I put it in its place, I compartmentalize it.
Okay.
And so there's that part of me, but then there's also the academic part of me whereby I know more than a lot of people, not most people, but just a lot of people who maybe they don't understand enough about their history, the way of life of their ancestors, why certain things are the way that they are. Um, I I have a fairly solid grasp on a good chunk of that, and it sits well with me. And I don't see it as being incompatible with these other things. I think it's a clash for you where you focus on the wrong things. The Christianity, for example, that was brought over here, without going into a full lecture, the Christianity that was brought over here was a particular type of regional specific Christianity, which
Yeah.
was European
Okay.
and Western.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so if you focus on those European things as the main thing, and somebody comes along and starts challenging those things as being not important, or things that they came along later or they can change or whatever, then obviously you'll be shook. But if your foundation isn't on any of that, but it's on certain core things, then you can encounter someone of a different faith and you can empathize with them. And then more importantly, you can reconnect with your own ancestors and see the sense in what your ancestors were doing without you having to basically say they were just inherently evil and ignorant and barbaric. And that has implications for who we are as people today, and it has implications for me in my day-to-day existence, how I engage with people, etc. So for me, these things are all kind of 360 degrees for me. Ghana only helped me to understand that.
See, I didn't know that we are going to get here this early. Um, but you have started it. You mentioned academia, and you mentioned religion, and religion specifically. We're talking about Christianity, right? And we've had several conversations about how academia, no matter where it's placed, is heavily European and white men influenced and controlled.
Yes.
Then when we look at religion, Christianity specifically, and Christianity in Western Africa, it is largely Western white men controlled, right? So these two things have now, over time, they present themselves as Ghanaian, Nigerian, right? But the skeleton and the structure that these buildings are built on, the foundation, they are Western, European, and white men. And I know that.
Let's go even further and say they're white supremacist,
white
to
supremacists.
be very specific.
So
Yes.
I now call white supremacy white ignorance, because I feel like my theory is that if you say white supremacy exists, it means that whether it's tangible or intangible, that it truly does exist. But for me, I'm trying to teach myself to see it as white ignorance in manifestation as oppression.
Okay.
Right? And
Okay.
so when we're looking at it like this, I also know that one of the ways that we've discussed that these things can, we can begin to see little change within the academia, because I'm going to bring it into religion. Within the academic space, I know that you are also taking this journey of unlearning, relearning, while still being within the system, like unlearning and relearning,
Yes.
and using yourself as a benchmark, using yourself as an example. You know, these are the things I learned, I'm unlearning them, and these are the new things I'm bringing in. But because I'm inside this system, no one can dislocate me. So what I'm relearning, I'm bringing out, right? So when you look at that, and you have a very specific experience with academia, where you enter the system and you realize that, oh, this is not the true system, and that has affected the journey as a teacher, right? As a teacher and as an educator that you are now. How does that affect religion for you? Because the same system.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah, I see what you mean. I think the problem for me with kind of whiteness in the ivory tower is literally called an ivory tower.
Yeah.
The problem with it is that it comes from a tradition that has taught it to consider itself higher than other systems and other ways of being. And so there are certain traditions that come with that. And I think for those of us who come from outside of, like, we're not descended from Aristotle and Plato and Socratic method, and like those ways of that's not our system. And so we have a different way of looking at science and religion and arts, etc., even life, economics, all these things. For those of us who come from other ways of being, I think what has happened with all the information that is in the world now, more information flowing through the world than at any point in history. And like, more people in this world have more access to information than any of their ancestors in their entire ancestral line. That's whether you're online or not. Yeah. So even the people who are just listening to radio every day have access to more information than their ancestors did, right? And so it's just become harder to maintain the fallacy that one system is inherently superior to another in all things. It becomes on a daily basis patently ridiculous. Yeah. And so then the rest of it is, and this is my viewpoint and my approach to most things, is you have to understand what is tradition, and you have to understand what is the core truth, you see. And so it's very hard for me, for example, when I look out into the world right now and I see, for example, people claiming Christianity, for example, and the inherent whiteness of Christianity. For me, I have to reconcile that with the fact that I know that in the development of Christianity, from where it was as a faith that did not even have its own scripture, this is around the time that the New Testament epistles were still being written,
Yes.
that the people of that time.
Is this before Saint Paul or after?
Oh no. This is actually like, let's say, during the. In fact, so let's take the people who were around the time of Saint Paul.
Okay.
They didn't have a New Testament because
No.
literally Paul is writing those epistles.
Yeah.
The Gospels themselves are written some 200, 300 years after Christ died,
Yes.
right? And so people didn't have these things, and ideas were floating around, and a lot of those ideas were informed by people who were from the African continent. And so you have some of the earliest church fathers. One of the biggest arguments that has come to define what Christianity is whether Christ was God or whether he was the Son of God. So this is by way of example, the Christological argument.
Yes.
And the two biggest figures in that, both Arius and Athanasius,
yes.
Unless I'm wrong, I believe both of them were North African, for example.
Yeah.
And that's just an example. There's so many others. And so there's a lot of African thought that goes into early Christianity. But then Christianity does what it does like any other religion. Any religion goes out into different parts of the world and it localizes and it absorbs local tradition. So, for example, the very same Ghanaian who would be horrified at the idea of going into the forest and worshipping a tree will have a Christmas tree in the corner of their house at Christmas time because it's Christian tradition. But it has nothing to do with Christianity other than the fact that it's a European traditional practice which has been absorbed into mainstream Christianity. You see, so those kinds of things. So when you know,
add to this, just before you continue, to add to this, even the Catholics, they have their shrines,
yes,
and the same people
yes,
who frown at a traditional shrine by
yes,
or priestess or by a worshiper of one of the deities, but they do have
yes,
like a full shrine in their house.
Yes, yes. So they can have that. And in all honesty, I feel like when there's a certain level on which religions start to converge, because there's a strand within Christianity right now, and it's not pervasive to the whole, but there's a strand within Christianity right now that says that it is Christian responsibility to look after the earth. So there's an environmentalist strand within modern Christianity. It doesn't pervade through all of it, certainly not on the prosperity side of things, where it's like they emphasize the fact that there's dominion over the earth. Whereas everyone else is like, okay, there's custodianship over the earth, stewardship. We must look after the earth. And that is very compatible with the ways in which my ancestors looked at the earth. We literally gave names, godly names, to our rivers, to like Mfansipim as a school is built on a hill. The hill was called Kwabuche, and I think it was worshipped as such. And it was very intentional on the part of the missionaries to build a school on the hill to demonstrate that it's like we can do this without your gods doing anything. Our God is more powerful. It was a statement. But today, the school is called Kwabuche. Like, that's the nickname for the school. But people don't realize that is the name of a god, a hill, because that's what we used to do. Trees, rivers, lakes, etc., etc. We would worship these things. Some of the most powerful gods in the Akan system would have been like Tano, for example, is the child of Nyame, but we have the river Tano. You see, Mame Water is the queen of the sea. Like, so that environmental kind of consideration was wired and hard baked into our own religious system. And so there are compatibilities, etc., etc. And so for me, again, when it comes to the academic side of things, my academic practice allows me access to a lot of information, and I read a lot of things and I try and study as much as I can. I am doing so within a system where it definitely values whiteness above other forms. And so what would happen, for example, is African studies. African studies is populated by a lot of people who are not African.
Yeah.
You see, in a way that is not the case in the opposite. So European studies is not populated by a lot of people who are not European. And it's very hard for you to get up and claim that you're an expert on European studies coming from Africa, having visited Europe for a total of 1 year, than it is the other way around. That's just an example, you see. So
And to even
I
add,
have to.
to that example, there's an example that I always refer to when we're talking about highlight. There's a professor in Ghana currently that has been in Ghana for a very long time, and from an academic
a very, very long time.
From an academic perspective, he is the strongest academic reference when we're talking about highlight, specifically Ghanaian highlight.
Yes.
And several times I've sat down with some people and I've questioned that. And I have said, if we were to look at academia as a practice, there are people who have performed and studied their contemporaries for more than 50, 60 years. And they can tell you how high life has transitioned. How are they not more positioned than someone who has studied the life that they have lived, right? Now, take a Ghanaian and take a Ghanaian to America and take that same Ghanaian and give that Ghanaian 60 years to study country music and tell me if that person can be a custodian to country music. Even Black people in America who have been there for generations can't even break properly into the country music industry. It's still a struggle. My problem is not the study. My problem is when white bodies do not announce their privilege when they enter into our institutions and take from our strongest, biggest references. And they say, oh, but all of this, the palaces open their doors to us, but they open their door to you because you are white and you're a white man. For you not to acknowledge that, for you to put that and say, it's because I'm studying, it's because I'm asking the right question. No. You know, so yeah.
I mean, I think, and I think I know who you're talking about. It's a very fine line, because I think that there are certain people who are able to enter certain spaces, and I think there are people who they enter spaces and they try and fill those spaces, and they make it seem as though they are so they are the authority, etc., etc. There are those people. And then I think there are also other people who they enter the space, they realize that they are not the authority, they acknowledge their privilege, and then they do the work, you see. And if you ask them, they'll be the first to tell you that this is who you should be speaking to, right? Or you should speak to this person, or you should speak to that person. Without necessarily positioning themselves as the. And I think it gets a bit complicated because
you have the system. So the system operates a certain way. One person can't change the system, right?
Yes, and so the system basically. So the way I often look at like academia, I look at it as, especially coming from a kind of African studies point of view, I look at it as something that came out of a particular way of study, very anthropological. So it's kind of like, I am civilized, this is my magnifying glass, I am looking at you, and I'm trying to understand your very strange ways. And I might have good intentions, but I'm coming at you with all of that behind me, whether I know it or not, right? And so I think that if, for example, I was white doing what I was doing, and I'll make another analogy shortly. If I'm white and I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm cataloging, let's say, High Life and all these stars and blah, 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 the real authorities on those topics are the people who I'm interviewing, right? The people who I'm speaking to, the people whose data that I'm collecting. But so that's the people who I'm dealing with on the one side. But then the people I'm dealing with on the other side are people who, it's almost like they don't want to deal with these people directly. They want a middleman. And so you basically become the middleman. And so then you have a responsibility as the middleman to acknowledge the fact that you're a middleman, you see, and try as much as you can to direct people to those people. But then it gets complicated.
Yeah,
because
because
okay.
the social capital and the academic capital, it's not transferable, right? Because at the end of the day, when the conversation is when people are having this conversation within the academia space, and they say, who has studied their life for 30 years or 40 years or this, you know, they do not. They when they want the BO and all of that, they do not look for. I don't think that we have high life musicians who have practiced between West Africa, looking at West African high life now, because that's the one I'm interested in.
Aware of. Okay.
Yeah, looking at West African, I do not think that they are practitioners, because when you look at the people who practice high life in the 60s, a lot of them have transitioned from performing, right? So, but the academia space have not transitioned these people into becoming lecturers.
I think academia will always place a heightened respect on academics.
Yes.
So, and like right now, I'm doing my PhD, and like the idea is that you finish and you have an appreciation for people who went through the rigor that you went through, etc., etc. And so people who didn't go through that, you're kind of like, okay, that's cool, but like, like, are you? So I think that I really like what you're saying about the difference between the academic and the practitioner. And in fact, it's been a personal struggle for me. I remember going to the European Conference for African Studies, which is a whole other thing. The European Conference for African Studies, but that's a whole other thing. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Atukwesin. And at that time, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do a PhD or not. And so I asked him his opinion, and I was very honored that he knew who I was at all, but he seemed to know who I was. And he told me that following my career, it seems like, and he told me that there's the academic path and then there's the practitioner path, you see. And it's very rare that you get both. But I need to think about it. The way he sees it is, I've been a practitioner for most of my life. I don't study like Ghanaian popular culture primarily from an academic position. This scene that I'm a part of. And so I'm there, I DJ, I speak to people, I push people, I connect people, like those things that I can do, I do. And that's as a practitioner, not as a lecturer. You see. So he was basically saying that there is a practitioner path and there's an academic path. The thing you need to understand, he made me laugh, he said, you go and study, and then you come out and you'll be employed by a practitioner because the practitioner was practicing while you were academicizing. You see, that kind of thing. So there's definitely that distinction. But then I think one of the people who has been the biggest inspiration for me in terms of like what I am trying to do is Dr. Sion Neely. She's the first person who I went up to when I said I wanted to do a doctorate. And she gave me my first pieces of advice. And one thing that I noticed about Sion is she got her PhD, but I don't see her as one of those people who's generating papers and just doing research. She's just been on the ground doing the work. And that's not to invalidate the work that academics are doing when they're writing those papers, because I think it's very important to connect dots. Sometimes the musician who is doing the music hasn't even connected their own music to somebody else's.
Yeah.
And academics can be quite great at doing that and at that kind of curatorship. But I really appreciate the way Sion has gone about her kind of very practitioner-led academia. So when she's writing a paper, she's writing it steeped from, these are my people, I'm writing about my people and myself. And I really appreciate that a lot more than I appreciate kind of like, okay, so here's my magnifying glass and let me look up on the people and see what I find. I think there's a big difference.
A lot of the time, this is what you get, right? For me, I feel like there is the academia, there is the practitioner, and there is the educator, you know?
Okay.
And I feel like as an educator, you have to be a mixture of so many things, you know? You have to be a mixture of the practitioner, you have to be a mixture of, you have to understand the academia to a point. You have to understand all of these words.
Yes.
But for me, I feel like what transcends the educator, a practitioner is not really focused on, how would I put it? The practitioner is focused on the work that is being done.
Their work.
Right? Yes.
Exactly.
Focused on the work that is being done. Now, whether they're teaching someone directly or indirectly, that's secondary, right? The educator is focused on collecting data. So the teaching part is secondary.
I don't know. Maybe it's because you said educator.
Sorry, the lecturer, the academia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe the academic.
The academic,
in a sense, is interested in gathering data.
Yeah, the academic is interested.
But then the educator, slash teacher slash lecturer.
I'm going to end with the educator. I don't think teachers and lecturers are educators. I don't think all teachers and lecturers are educators.
No, you're right. Not all of them.
Yes.
Not all of them.
So now there is the academic. Even if as an academic you don't write a lot of papers, this is me speaking from my observation and with the intention of taking a particular journey. Even if you don't write a lot of paper and you are busy teaching students, you are still very restricted to data collection and data transferring, because all you are teaching is taking from somebody's data and transferring it to the student, right? So now,
if I can jump in on that, I think that's definitely some educators.
Yeah, I'm coming.
But the type of educator. Okay.
The academic now. Everybody who falls within the academic, like I said, not everybody who is within the academic is an educator. For me, an educator transcends all of this. An educator can come from any field. An educator can come from the academic, it can come from the practice, it can come from a community, it can come from a traditional practice. And an educator is an educator no matter where you put them. Because the educator's job primarily is to guide, point, not to teach. Because for me, I feel there's a big difference between teaching and educating. Educating is not the transfer of information into another person's head. No, it's the it's showing people how to be inquisitive, curiosity, pointing. Yeah, that's for me.
So I think what's happening here is, it's not semantics per se, but I think it's just in how we define things.
Yes.
Because for me, what you are describing as an educator, that is what I describe as a teacher. But then I don't think that every single teacher is a good teacher. Yes, so I think what you're describing as an educator is, for me, my terminology for that is a good teacher.
Yeah,
And then the type of person who has the label.
Yeah, but when you look at it, since primarily teaching on a large scale has failed, the scope of what education is on a large scale has failed. Like our educational system from zero to university to even the PhD point, it really is not pushing society beyond. I think educators are the ones who have transcended. So anybody you call a teacher and an educator, I'm not. If you say that person is a teacher, you know,
Yes,
I'm like, okay, you understand? Is this person educating, you know, or just copying and pasting? You know, that person is a scientist. Is this person a practitioner? Is this person copying and pasting, or is this person trying to point at deep dots?
Yeah.
You know? So for you, for instance, I'll call you an educator because when I speak to you, it's you can see that you pay attention to the questions that you are being asked and you think about the answers you want to give, right? As an educator, it's just preset because there are answers for these questions.
Oh, wait, is that, you said that's an educator, or do you mean a teacher?
That's a teacher.
By your definition.
Yeah, that's a teacher.
Okay.
Find all the preset answers for all the preset questions. But an educator will say, do you know if you can find another answer? They say these are the answers, but they could be something else, you know?
Okay.
And
if you say that teaching has failed, like, and you're talking about that particular type of teaching, I would completely agree with you. I don't think it's particularly useful for the kind of world that we're in. Yeah. But what I would say is that even in the case of the people who do just the data gathering, for example, I think that role is almost as important as the educator's role, in that I really have a deep appreciation for pure academics who are just really about their data gathering, and they go out and they do deep research into things, etc., because those are tools that the educator can then take and use it to, it's an extra dot for you to synthesize into the bigger whole. But I think what has failed, if I can learn, I think what has failed really is that I think as a planet, we do ourselves a disservice if we place one system of knowledge inherently above all others, because there's just too much good stuff in all of these different systems, that why not take or attempt to synthesize all of them, or at least operate with all of them on a certain level of respect. And I think that is something that when I look out into academia now, it's a conversation that has been going on for a long time. And I think it has amplified recently. And I think I'm seeing a lot of the beginnings of conversations around how do we do that. Some people are trying to experiment, you see, etc. But there is definitely a crisis. And so if you say that it has failed, I can see where you're coming from.
So,
but I can also see that
I don't think we're disagreeing. I think there's a small miscommunication happening. I actually am saying the educator, that strand called the educator, cuts across everything. So
it does.
That data analyst, that person who is about collecting data and using very transparent approach, you know, ethical. That's an educator too. You know, that's what I'm saying. That trans, it cuts across when you know that it's not about your opinion. You know, when you can always remove yourself and do the work, you know, as do the work that is needed, you know, not impressing yourself. And I think this is where we have a problem with whiteness within academia, because they were not educators. They were trying to impose teaching, you know, replace.
Yeah, I think this is definitely like a huge part of the colonial legacy. What they were originally trying to do, and to a large extent, what has now become a bit more subliminal, a bit more indirect.
Yeah.
It's been less about educating and more about, maybe, especially back in the day, was about creating automatons.
Yeah.
And so there's a legacy of that, where it's rote learning. It's not really definitely not trying to get you to challenge and question, because that's the last thing that they needed you to do. And now it's become even more sophisticated. So there is actually space within that system where they can accommodate you and the way in which you think differently and the way in which you challenge them. It can literally be commodified, and it can be like, you know, made into part of the system. Like eventually you receive your knighthood and literally become part of the establishment for challenging the system.
Yeah.
It's a very fascinating like process. So yeah, that's there as well. That's definitely there as well. What I would say for academia, at least the little that I'm studying so far, in terms of what it means to do research into a thing, quantitative research, qualitative research, there's definitely value. Then it really forces you to think very carefully about how you go about gathering data. There are the people who argue that you must remove yourself completely, but then there's another set of people who I really admire, who they actually feel like you must acknowledge the fact that it is actually impossible for you to remove yourself completely. And so what you need to do is you actually need to situate yourself in the thing and think really hard about that and what that means, and be very transparent about it, and to then try and fight against what needs to be fought against. And that's the movement that is existing, particularly in qualitative research at the moment. And I have time for that, as opposed to, and it's also in journalism. Brilliant example is Eliza Nyangwe's The Correspondent.
Yes.
They, in their method of journalism, are not even going to remotely try and tell you that journalism is completely impartial. And they've done the same thing that academia has been doing. Like, they're one of those rare cases of a group of journalists who they situate themselves in the thing and acknowledge where they are coming from, so that you know that these are my biases. These are like, and I don't see that very often. BBC is still trying to say that it's impartial.
Yeah, it's tricky.
CNN is trying to say that it's impartial.
It's very tricky. It's very tricky. So my last question is, before we go back to personal. So the concept of academia and African studies, I believe, like, okay, how do we reduce this gap, right? How do we increase the numbers of Black people, Africans, and those within the intersections to be the leading voices, you know, teaching this knowledge and producing this knowledge? So definitely we are knowledge producers already by default.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And I'm like, if you look at the invent of formal education, right? Which school did all the white people go to become professors? You know, they had to transfer practice.
Yes.
Into
from the
So I think there has to be, that has to happen for the continent and Black people. They have to begin to en masse transfer practice into academia. In that way, it becomes different because these people come with practice experience. Some come with original ideas. So when you fuse that with academia, that's what is happening with your practice. Even though you've been going on this academia journey, but you've also been steadily practicing for more than 20 years. So when you mix those two together, you can't completely control that person.
So then I would argue that you've answered your own question, because I do very strongly think that one of the things that needs to happen within our African space, within studies of things that are to do with our ancestors and that are to do with not just our ancestors, but our present and our future, I think it's very important that practitioners enter the space and essentially take over the space. And I think that is very slowly what has been happening. You have some people who are not practitioners who have also been going in there, and they've just been putting in the work, you see. And so there is a conversation that is really, really going on very, very strongly within African studies about this right now as we speak. And it's not a new conversation, but it's definitely, you can feel that there's a new rush of energy that has entered the conversation, and there's a certain amount of shit that won't be taken anymore, right? And so I think those conversations have started happening, or they're being built on, like the kind of thing that happened to, let's say, a W.B. Du Bois. That kind of thing gets perpetuated to some extent even now, but it is also in a sense less likely to happen now because there's just more eyes on everybody. And like I said, more information, a little bit more accountability. There's just a bit more push than there has historically been. And so I think within our space, it is important that we have our people document. And I would even go even further. I would say that not everybody has to even take the academic route.
Definitely.
Not everybody has to take the academic route. Definitely. I would argue that one of the things that I always think about is we just need more people who curate and document as a whole. Research is a very different thing, but documentation and curation. And so there are people who I admire the crap out of. Like, take someone like Sway Kid and what he's doing with Cool Art Blog. The guy is documenting his culture. And to me, he is the authority. And so at some point in time within the academic space, someone is going to come and ask me a question that is for Sway Kid. Now, ideally, someone like Sway Kid should basically get the training that it takes such that when somebody comes with like grant money or something into research, into something in particular, that money shouldn't be going to like an academic like me to now go and consult Sway Kid and other people. It should go to a Sway Kid. That's where we're trying to get to. So you see, where the sources of knowledge are given the direct benefits of their knowledge.
But what you just said now, you're taking it back to our early reference, which is, and I know that this has happened a lot of times with you, where a project comes to you and you say, I am not the person for this project. This person, that's how you begin to use your power, right? This person is the person for this project, right? Because if you don't do that, that person would be picked for the project, right? So it's a journey. I saw an application. I saw an application for a graduate program. But it's like a research program for 2 years, and it's only for PhD students or PhD students, right? And I sent them an application. And I told them that I don't have a master's, I don't have all of these things that you were asking for, but this is my 15 years of practice. Let's see. And they are supposed to announce in August. They still have not contacted me, because if they have not picked you, they'll tell you that, hey, you have not been picked. So I bet they're sitting down there and they're just looking at it and say, what have we gotten ourselves into? Well,
good luck, Charlie. Yeah, for real. Because no, that's the way that ideally it should be. There is deep value in academic practice, but what I think would be really beautiful is if we can also find ways to make academic practice a bit more mainstream. So take that knowledge and flood the streets with it. Make sure that everybody knows how to look at things in a particular way, and make those ways a plethora of ways. But like when I look out right now and advice on how to avoid being scammed online, or ways to engage with social media, etc., etc., a lot of it is the kind of stuff that academics have had to be thinking about in their practice for years. But it's now that it is entering the mainstream, and I think we need a lot more of that. And we're at a unique point in our history as humans where that is actually possible. And so I really admire the students who they don't only listen to the lectures and go into the textbooks and stuff like that, but like they're going off and they're teaching themselves things from online and blah blah blah. Like, I admire that. I also admire the way in which certain academic terms now enter popular vocabulary. You see, I really admire that as well, so long as it comes with an understanding of where that's coming from. I just think I've for a very long time been an advocate for the popularization of academia, for people to, for it and some of its better ideas to just go into the mainstream and help to improve the mainstream, because we're at a point where this is actually deeply necessary. There is a lot of information in the world, and there's more information than was available in our parents' and grandparents' time. And so we all need to know how to sift through that information. Otherwise, certain things become casualties, and those things include truth and empathy.
This goes back to you just being a very good person and like empathy. I think you just showed why your empathy level is at your core, because the idea of popularizing academia is beautiful, and then
in theory.
In theory. And then we look at the fact that academia from the jump was a class system. If you were a professor back then, Charlie, your mouth was even as strong as the richest people in the world and everything, because you were in a space where not everybody could enter, and
kind of. I mean, one thing that I really like about the origins of way back in the day, if we're talking about kind of like the early universities and like what was going on in like Timbuktu and like all of those kinds of, like even ancient Greece, like when you look at it, it was people who were they were philosophers. That's why a PhD is literally like a doctor of philosophy in something. Yeah. And so it was just philosophers who were people who just took the time out to think a bit more deeply about life, just sharing their knowledge with people. There was not necessarily a salary to it. There was no specifically organized system around it where you're doing class 1, class 2. It was like an apprenticeship.
Well, you are talking about educators. So I'm saying when they not took that and
so way back in the day,
so that's where we all wanted to go back to. But then when they not formalized it and made it a class system, I feel like whenever we catch up and go back to where you just spoke about, where it's accessible, where academia is accessible, they'll create another thing. Maybe to now be academia 2.0.
Yeah.
Until then, we'll keep Right. Well, I want to ask you a question.
Yes.
You made a statement.
Yes.
I had to design my own sense of manhood and masculinity.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that stuck, it stuck because
Mm.
I've known you, and that statement I don't think is simple, you know. Yeah,
Mm.
the reason I'm saying it's not simple because there are a lot of things people say
Mm-hmm.
and they don't practice.
Yeah.
You understand? Because
Yep.
anyone who says because I had to do this statement that you
Mm-hmm.
said, anyone
Yeah.
who can make a statement, I had to design my manhood and
Mm-hmm.
masculinity, it means
Yes.
automatically that I had to not accept the manhood and masculinity that was presented to me. So
Yes.
automatically, it means that you're looking at patriarchy, misogyny, oppression of women. Like you're looking at it
Mm.
on a large scale, and you are saying, I want to try not to be a part of this day by day. You know?
I would actually say that in a sense comes later. The thing that comes first, like you said for yourself, is the personal, your own personal experience. And that's very small scale. You've not started thinking about big ideas. You've not started thinking necessarily about the patriarchy, misogyny. What you're thinking about is your reality
Mm-hmm.
and your experiences. And so for someone like me, I I can think back to, I think there was a point in time I remember where there were two things that were happening for me. I was a teenager, and so I had the same insecurity that really plagues teenagers, you
Yeah.
know? Like, I don't think it goes away. We are defined by the insecurities that we feel as teenagers.
Yeah.
Like, that shit stays with you for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And so I was going through that. And I was in a boys' school, and I wasn't the most macho guy. I literally did not have like muscles like anybody else. I didn't have the brute strength. I wasn't particularly good at sports. My hand to eye coordination sucked. Um, I wasn't like I was a virgin until like university. Like, so all the things, although there were lots of people who were lying about losing their virginity, but
Yeah.
you know, boys' school. So
Yes.
it's like all those things that made you a man. It's like you were able to smash your father's car.
Yeah.
You had broken your virginity. It's not even that you were sleeping with many women. It was that you had just broken your virginity. The bar was very low at that point. You were stronger than people. Like you had Takashi, like those kinds of things. That was not me. And so I remember there was one point in time where I literally, I was early teens or something. I go up to my mom and I'm like, Mom, I think I'm gay. And my mom is like, really? Why? And then I was like, yeah, because I'm just not any of those things and blah, blah, blah. And my mom was like, okay, so are you attracted to men? I was like, no. Are you attracted to women? Yes. Okay. Well, you're not gay, but maybe like your definition of like, she didn't say definition or anything like that, but basically the way that you are a boy is different from the way that other people are boys, you see. So that kind of thing. And so I had to now, I think the thing that I learned to do that I think would really benefit our society as a whole is I had to learn how to internally validate myself for the things that I deemed to be masculine
Yeah.
rather than waiting for external validation. And that has resonance for when you're older. There are lots of men right now who they, for example, might cook for the women in their lives,
Yeah.
right? But as soon as they know that they're in the glare of their boys, they'll be like, don't tell my boys that I do this. Or if their boys come along and laugh at them for cooking, that's the end of it. You see. or it has to do with having a particular car. And a car, it's not for your own satisfaction, it's for people to look at you and say, wow, you're a man.
Yeah.
Or it's all these things which are to do with external validation. And to me, I actually tie this very strongly into the boys' school system in a place here like Ghana. I feel like people will say that, yes, it's a great place for instilling discipline and blah, 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 rare. It's a type of discipline, but it's not a discipline that holds per se into adulthood. Like the people who are indisciplined in the kind of corruption that we're seeing, did they not go to these very fine and elite schools, etc., etc.? So don't come at me with the discipline argument. I just feel like a lot of the kind of bullshit that the likes of a Councillor Lutrot are saying online right now, like I feel a lot of that comes from the type of masculinity that that requires external validation.
Yeah.
When you have that internal validation, then you get some really interesting things going on with masculinity, where you can cry and it's a manly as fuck thing. You like all of those kinds of things. And so again, for me, it comes back to, this was not something where I grew up and I was thinking about things like patriarchy and misogyny. Those were things that I came to after my personal experience. Yeah.
So the moment where you had that conversation with your mother, right? And she gives you a different way to look at masculinity and manhood, right? And you run with that. At what point do you connect that to the system of men, white men at the top, and all that type of men, and then women, and then all the intersectional identities? At what point did you start looking at, at what point did you start looking at it from a societal perspective?
Yeah. I would honestly say there are two places, actually. At first I was going to say one, but two. I think in the earlier sense, these are the types of things that I start thinking about in terms of when I'm in university, but not because of university itself, but because around that time, I'm a young person who's exploring ideas. So around the time that I'm going to university, I'm not just going to classes, but I'm also going to talks, I'm reading books, I'm having these deep-ass conversations with friends, and certain things that you held true start to unravel and others start to cement, right? But then I think the thing that really brought it all together for me was Twitter. It was Twitter. It was Twitter. I think Twitter, there are certain people who use Twitter in a way where all they are getting is kokonsa and just gossip.
Yeah.
Good for you. For me, I've been on Twitter for a very long time.
Yeah.
My current iteration of me being on Twitter is like my second or third being on Twitter. So I've been on Twitter for a very long time.
Yeah.
I was on Twitter at a time where if you typed in Ghana, most of what you get is NGO and intelligence reports on Ghana. And that's it. You wouldn't get entertainment news. You wouldn't get it wasn't there. Ghanaians weren't on Twitter very much, you see. So that's like me, old man Twitter status, right? And just growing up on Twitter and taking the time to read the posts that people link to, making note of people's experiences. As someone who enjoys connecting dots, Twitter is pornography. It's so much dot connecting. You see, and so for the person who is willing to learn, there are things to be learned. As opposed to the person who wants to just jump to things. Like there are things to be read. It's pointed me in the direction of books, people, talks, ideas, etc., more than Facebook, more than Instagram, more than any other social media platform that I've ever been on. And so I would say that you have that, and then that leads me actually into teaching. Because yes, I have my law degree, but then I am this person who's just constantly reading and gathering data and then writing. So I'm writing Dust Magazine, I'm doing my blog. So by the time Ashesi comes knocking that they're looking for someone to teach about text and meaning, critical theory, how to look at different media critically. I have taught myself to do these things, and they are present in the way in which I write. And so all of that leads me into like teaching at this school. And there I have free license to do even more reading, to look at things from an even more kind of, and so that's like the graduation of me.
Wow. Okay. That's fantastic. So what do you think, if you look at the mirror now, right? Who do you hold responsible?
Responsible?
Yeah. When you look at the mirror now, all of this transition.
When I look at the mirror.
Yeah, all of these transitions that happened, right? And now you are aware. You are aware. Every time you move, you are aware. Actually, it's, like you said, the best of your knowledge. You know, like the last 5 years has given you a certain clarity, right? So now, every day you deal with yourself. Because for me, I feel like a lot of people run away from dealing with self, right? But the level of clarity that you are talking about can't come without you dealing with self. It can't come.
Yes.
Like I said, internal validation. So who do you hold responsible? How do you hold yourself responsible? Nothing in particular. You understand? Nothing in particular, but just
No, I get it. I get it. Just generally. I think that it would be very hard for me to kind of pull apart the web or the matrix of people who make me who I am. I think that there are definitely people who have played their parts. I would argue that anybody who I've had any sustained engagement with, actually even sometimes people who like, you know,
come and go,
have like they have very profound like impacts on the way in which you move and operate and live. And so I would honestly say, like, I can't whittle it down, because you first off, you have to, like, my entire ancestral line, for one, and all the people that they encountered before you get to my parents. I think the type of man that I have tried to be is specifically defined almost against the type of man that my father has been. Even though that there are good things about him that I also try and emulate. And then also my mother played a massive role, obviously. But then also just, I think every person I've been in a relationship with has helped to shape me into the person that I am. There are friends that I have who have helped craft me into who I am. There are people who aren't friends of mine. And then there are also people who I've never met. People who I've read their works, who have influenced me in that particular point in time, and they came to me when I needed them. And then there are people now. So it really is like I am the child that was raised by the village, like in the sense that it takes a village to raise a child.
It really
all those people are responsible. And even the random strangers who, like, I'm not directly engaging with, but I'm seeing things. Like, let me give you a really small example. There's a woman who was called Lisa Lewis. She was in my master's class when I was studying in international studies and diplomacy. Lisa was just the nicest human being, period. If you're nicer than Lisa, they'll catch you and throw you in jail. It's not a done thing. She was nice. Nice, right? And I remember once a group of us went to her house. She invited us around. I think she was going to sing or something like that. She and her daughter were doing something, or maybe we were celebrating her daughter's something, but something, there was singing that was going down. And it's when we got there that we came to realize that Lisa was like Christian, not Christian, but Christian, right? But what struck all of us, because all of us were non-Christian, my first man was Muslim, like like all of us were like not particularly weren't Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that stayed with me is that Lisa seemed to be the type of Christian who should have been going about our classes with a Bible, constantly trying to preach, and everything becomes about church and this, and never, never, not even once. And one thing that when I moved to Ghana and I'd have people come and preach at me and stuff, they were trying to convert me. It would always strike me that Lisa's example of just living what she believes in and it making her into this awesome human being had a very profound effect on how I look at faith, on how I look at conversion, and how I look at goodness, how I look at empathy. Lisa died a couple of years when we were out of university.
Yeah.
And so I only knew her for a year.
Wow.
I went to her house maybe twice in that year, but she had a profound influence on the way in which I move and operate. So that's an example.
Yeah, it's indicative. Our environment and the people we meet, and like you just said, long or short, it's indicative of who we become. You know, because it's, I don't know. It's like I said, the body is a memory collector, right? So you're just collecting data. Now it's left for you to decide which data you want to use, right? Yeah, it's this. Okay, so to round up, because I don't want us to, because I want us to do this again. And if you notice, today's conversation has not been on any particular thing. There's just been the transitions, you know, and moment. So maybe other conversations, then we can say, okay, let's talk about this and let's talk about that. But now I want to come to the end of this, looking at moments, you know. Yeah, moments in time that you can point at and say, this shifted me. This shifted me. If you can just give a few, anyone you want to share, like, this shifted me, you know? Yeah, this affected me.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you can give, if you can show us, this affected me to become this or not to become this. Like you've given about your father already, but if you can now make it very specific to moment, actually.
Okay. Moments. Moments. I think I'm trying to avoid talking about the death of my mother.
No, let's not go there. Let's not go there.
No. So pause. Okay. I always come back to faith.
Okay.
I always come back to faith. And there was a very specific moment in the long process that was my mother's passing. So I'm not talking about like, oh, my mother died and I was massively affected. No, this is a very specific moment whereby the background is that she's lying in a hospital bed dying of cancer.
Yeah.
And it's a very fast moving cancer, right?
Yeah.
And so I've been praying, like they tell you that the God that you serve is more powerful than all of these things.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I've been praying for like, obviously the cancer to just hop on the away bus and move. Peace out. And that's not happening. And I remember having, for some bizarre reason, because I don't know how I feel about like angels and this and whatnot. But I remember just a prayer that I had that there should be angels at my mother's bedside, just comforting her, helping her towards wellness, right? So this is a prayer that I had been having throughout the time that I had been in London, where I had been summoned because she was dying.
Yeah.
And I remember the very specific moment where I realized that she's not going to heal, right? And in that moment, it's very easy for you to basically just throw up your hands and basically be like, I don't believe anymore and blah, blah, blah. But that moment was accompanied by a particular thought, which is that I realized in that moment that my brother and I, in particular, had been by my mother's bedside almost 24/7 throughout the entire period that I had been asking
Wow.
for
Angel
angels to
station.
be by her bedside. And so sometimes we are the answers to our own
Yeah.
prayers.
Yeah.
And that to me was a very profound realization because it's helped me to navigate death.
Yeah.
And that's no small thing. Like I've just lost my brother. The reason why I'm able to speak to you in any kind of sane fashion is partly because of that realization.
Yeah.
Like, you see, so that's a moment. It's not to do with my mom's passing in general, but that moment and that moment of realization. That's one. Another moment that shaped me, I would say, is another moment that shaped me is, so my mother was an authority on the subject of female genital mutilation, or female genital cutting, wherever you come from. And her work basically brought her into contact with the writer Alice Walker.
Mm.
And they became good friends. At some point in time, my mother is destitute and tells Auntie Alice about it, and Auntie Alice sends a check in the mail that clears my mother's debt. So that's how close they became. And so at some point in time when I'm in university, Alice Walker is visiting London, and she wants, my mother isn't around, she's in Switzerland. But she says she wants to meet myself and my younger brother. And so I remember this was organized. She went to where my mother's organization, Forward. She went to the Forward offices, and then my brother and I were brought along, and there is Alice Walker, the Alice Walker.
Yeah.
And I remember she looks at me and she says, so you're the one who's the writer? And I say, yes, but right now I'm studying law. And you should have seen the shift in her face. Her face shifts. she goes, law? And then I'm like, yeah, why? And then she says her ex-husband, I think it was her ex-husband, he was a great writer, and then he started studying law. And the better he got at law, the worse he got at writing.
Oh, wow.
And the reason why I cite this moment is because I had coursework that was due. I was in my final year of my law degree. I had coursework that was due. It never got handed in. Like, I dropped the law course.
Wow.
Like, I finished it, but it's like I lost interest.
Yeah. And just
I lost.
Wow.
Hey, I lost interest, crowd. Like final year, like I lost interest. I was, me. I'll become a West writer. Yeah, nah. Something's got to go, and yeah, the law degree suffered for that. So that definitely affected me because that was also trajectory. Another one, maybe a last one, was when I was making the decision to move here. So I'd done the internship.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd returned to London and I'm packing my things to move to Ghana. But in doing so, I was thinking to myself, this is a big transition point. At this point in time, I've been messing around with all of this kind of creativity stuff and DJing in particular. And maybe I should give that up and become a serious human being, like some people in my family would have wanted me to, and just wear a suit, go and do corporate, whatever. This was a thing that I was thinking at the time. So I remember going to visit my step cousin, and when I got there, her mother was there. This is Auntie Matilda. She's the late Amy Arthur's wife. Matilda. So yeah, the former second lady. So I'm visiting her daughter, who we go way back, and I'm talking about my plans. She asked me about my plans. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna move to Ghana. Oh, okay. What are you gonna do? Well, I'm thinking that, I've been like editorial assistant. I've been DJing for a while. Like, maybe moving back, I should just go into the corporate world and blah, blah. And she sat me down and she said, Kobe, here's the thing. I don't think you should give up on any of these individual things. Do not give up on your DJing. Do not give up on your writing. Do not give up on like any of these things that make you creative. I think you never know what will lead to where.
Wow.
But I don't think you should give up on these things. She told me that. And I remember I got to Ghana. There was that year that I was working for my dad that that didn't work out. But I found another job. But by the time I found another job, I started DJing. I think it was Kwekwa Nancy, the guy who Nos, who does production for One Love amongst other people, right? Yeah, so like I find him, he invites me to be on his radio show. I come on as a guest. He makes me a permanent guest, so it's me and him doing the show. So that's on Vibe FM. After work, so I'll go and I'll do my corporate job, and then I'll come and do this at the same time. Until eventually I get to this job where I have to go and see one of our clients and renegotiate the fee that they pay us. And the client is Multimedia Group, and it's one of the directors. And after the interview, after the meeting, he asked me if I have any experience doing radio, and I say, yes, I do. I'm currently DJing at Vibe FM. He says, give me a call. And that's what led to me working at Joy FM as a journalist and producer and DJ and founder of their digital department. Essentially, I put Joy FM on all its social media platforms, came up with the protocol for them to use at a time when Kobina Ankomah-Graham, who is now Minister of Information, had to be begged to mention Twitter on air, much less WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Like they all knew SMS, and they were like, what is this Twitter thing? Yeah. Like that opened up so many things for me. And it's literally because of that moment where Aunt Tilly was like, don't give up on all of these creative things that you do. Yeah. That's had an effect on me for sure.
Yeah. It's amazing because a lot of times we do not sit down to think about these moments, good or bad, good or bad. We do not sit down to think about the moments that have shaped the person that we are today. And it starts from birth. It actually starts from birth. I was listening to someone where I can't remember whether I was listening or reading, but this person had a moment where she was transported back to when she was a child and the memory of rape. And she had to go ask her mother. I can't remember how the story got into my head, but she had to go ask her mother, and the mother actually eventually told her that when she was like 2 or 3 or so, she actually was sexually abused. You see, so like our body carries so much,
Yes.
And I feel like sometimes take time to sit down and just ask your body, what it wants to teach. When we do the second one, I really want us to talk about men in relationship with women, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and that would be from both of our experience, and let's just look at how we can be better. I'm looking at it now. We know what it is, we know what the society standard is, but what are we doing to be better representation of what a man in relationship with women, or just general how men can be better. But to round it up, to round my side of this up, I want to end up with love and duty. it's not a question. It's not a. I want to say love
Okay.
and duty. Yeah.
Love and duty. So I should respond to it, or am I just supposed to say it?
Yeah, yeah.
Love and duty. Love and duty. For me, love is key. For me, love is the God language. It's like it is what it is, and that's why it has such a prominent role within anything that inquires us to look into our souls, whether it's psychology, religion, art, whatever. Like, love is key. I think that duty is very important. The most recent time that I thought about duty isn't in the sense of responsibility, but more in the sense that I feel like a lot of the ways in which we used to do things within our traditional ways of life were very duty driven, and love was expressed as duty.
Yeah.
And so I think that served its purpose, and it created wisdom that we should learn from. But I think that love is not the same as duty. It's more expansive than it's more expansive than duty, and therefore, I think I think duty is second to love, and where the two seem to clash, love should win. And if we use that as a guideline for how we move, then it will eventually bring us back to a good type of duty anyway.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
And on that note, I end my part of this. So, but I always open, if you have a question for me to end this, I'm also open to answering.
I don't think I have a question. I must admit, I thought that our conversation was going to be a lot more, also not just about kind of philosophy, knowledge, religion, being, but I thought it was also going to be a lot more about kind of arts and culture and stuff. And there are conversations that we've had there as well that I would definitely like to pick up on. And so if I had to phrase that as a question, it would be, are we going to do any of that in any of our subsequent, in our subsequent talk?
Yeah, so I'm happy that you have said subsequent, because when I invited you, see, there are people that I know this would be like easy with, you know, and I've always somehow said this to you, you know, we have very long conversations, and just to let you know, this is actually, in terms of my Zoom series, this is the longest. I knew coming into this that this was going to be very
long thing,
very good, not a long thing, very, very good thing. But I also knew that I wanted to introduce this as a series, you know, and that's why I presented it to you as a series of conversations. And yes, and I think moving forward, myself and you can pick topics and just go in.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
So now that cool. You're comfortable, you know that we are nice.
Yes. Yeah, man. Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you. This was yeah, this was pretty deep. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I did.
Thank you. And that note, hey, bye. My love to everybody at home.
Yes.
My love.
The very same. You know who I'm talking about. Please tell her I said a very big hello.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Okay, man.